Well, we're going to go ahead and start our program for our luncheon. We're very fortunate to have with us for our luncheon speaker today an individual that has had a great deal of experience in the space program. He's been involved in the shuttle and involved in the space station program, and was the program director for the space station program here in Houston, and now is serving as associate administrator for the Office of Spaceflight in Washington, and is in charge of both the shuttle and the station. So I'll turn the program over to Bill Gerstenmaier.
Thank you, George. It's my pleasure to be here today, and I'll try to give you some things to think about, and I would tell you two things I would like to take away kind of from this talk a little bit is to think about the systems that we're designing and the research that you're doing, and how are you preparing those systems and those personnel and those research objectives for the future needs of exploration. So I think this is a great time when we can start preparing and getting ready for exploration. So I challenge you, and I'll show you some examples of what we're doing on station today, what we've done in the past, and those things. And the purpose of those examples are to make you think in your research area, in your hardware area, in your area of expertise, what things could you be doing today to improve and prepare and get ready for exploration? So that will be the one item that I would like you to take away. And then the second thing is I'll show you some examples from Space Station, and I think you ought to think about how you can use Space Station potentially to improve some of the areas that you're working on to get ready to go for exploration. If you take a look at the screen behind me, you see the Space Station, the Moon, and Mars. I think I put those on there, and there's really some things to think about. You know, in the space station, you're hours away from coming home or bringing up resupplies or area of equipment to space station if it's needed. When you get to the moon, you're now probably days away from that same kind of capability. When you get to Mars, you're now months away. So they're truly stepping stones. So the degree of preparedness we have to be prepared for a Mars mission is on orders of magnitude much more intense than it is in either the moon or the space station. So I think there are good natural ways that we can learn from space station to expand our capabilities, how we deal with long duration aspects of space, what things are essential for exploration on space station, apply those on the moon, test them out, prove them on the moon, but we still have a chance there if it doesn't work out exactly right. We're only days away from getting resupply or some equipment back. The time delays are much shorter in terms of communication, and that's all in preparation to go to Mars, which is the next step after that. So I see these as really a logical progression. The other thing I'd like to start off with before I start is I'm from Washington now, and this is the 400th anniversary of Jamestown. And there's some pretty important analogies or interesting analogies from what occurred at Jamestown when they set the first settlement up on Jamestown compared to what we're doing for exploration now. You know, they left in December of, I guess, 1606, and then they arrived in Jamestown in 1607 on 14th of May this month. So it was about almost a 4 to 5 month journey across the ocean at that time, and that's kind of analogous to where we are with our journey to Mars. So in a sense, the same kind of transit times had to be endured by those early pioneers. The other thing that's interesting at that time is there were lots of colonies that got set up along the coast, but very few of them survived. And many of them would come and they just disappeared. Jamestown was one of the unique ones that was able to last. And if you read some of the history, some of the reasons they were able to last was the fact that they were consciously intended to be resupplied while they were there. So they had to live off the land for a period of time, but they had planned in a resupply period in the future, which made it critical for them. The other thing that's a pretty stark realization is they started out with 108 settlers, and by the time the first resupply came about 6 or 7 months later, they were down to about 30 left. So there was a tremendous mortality associated with that Jamestown settlement, and they faced, I listened to the talks this morning, about ethics and medical evaluations and how you do crew selection and all those things. And I kind of thought back to the early settlers in Jamestown, and I wonder how much of that they thought about when they started out, or they just went ahead and did it and then learned how tough it was going to be once they got started. So we have a tremendous chance to learn from history. We can be prepared, and we can make sure that as we go into the future, we've brought down that risk so we don't have to face those kind of mortality numbers. If you want to know what I think the 3 essential ingredients for exploration are, at least I'd say human exploration, is you clearly need high-performing crews. They need to be able to be prepared to do their mission, as we talked about, I heard you talk about this morning. The next thing I think is important is high availability systems. In other words, they don't need to be long, they need to be maintainable. In other words, you can repair them, fix them in place. They're available when you need them, and they're there. And then the third piece, which kind of ties both of those first two together, is operational experience. How do you operate or use those crews and the systems to the peak of their ability? And I think those are, from my perspective, are pretty important. I think, again, we have a lot of chances to learn and move forward. We've done a lot of activity on space station that's kind of pushed the envelope, and we still need some more. And again, this picture is over the Cook Strait that divides New Zealand and the South Islands, if you look down there at the water, and this is an EVA. And I think it's a pretty neat picture. Again, I think the other thing that was talked about this morning is that tie back to the home planet is really strong. It's neat in these pictures. I chose this picture not because of the EVA crew members out there working on the truss, but I chose the picture because of the Earth in the background. Again, when we go to Mars and we're more remote from the Earth and that tie back to the home planet isn't there, I think that's going to be something we need to think about. Again, in terms of high-performing crews, many things go into that. Is the work they're doing exciting? Is it compelling? Is it keeping them engaged? Are they really feel like they're contributing, that there's a reason why they're there, that they're not just, kind of maintaining time? That's very important in space station. It may be important during the transit to Mars. Are they actively participating? Are they physically ready to go do the jobs they do? Have they been essentially at the right conditioning level? Those kind of things. We're learning a lot on how to use the crews. We've been experimenting with, do we do back-to-back EVAs? Those are extravehicular activities, spacewalks. Or how much time do we put between those EVAs? Is there a right spacing? We're starting to learn how that fits and works, again, on space stations. Some of that will directly have application to the Moon and Mars. How often you go out and do sorties outside your habitat, and you go out, do you do it like at first we thought we would do like one an expedition, but now we put them almost back to back. We'll put maybe 2 days off between the EVAs, and that seems to work very well because it takes us about a week to set up the airlock, to go outside, to set up the suits, and then when all that overhead is done, you want to take advantage of it, so you want to stay in that same readiness level and then go out with the crew again if you can within 2 days. And it seems that the crews on orbit are actually better prepared to go out within 2 days. The ground controllers who are monitoring on the ground, they actually would like probably more than 2 days to get prepared because they learned something on that first EVA, something changed, it's not exactly working the way they wanted, and they would like to adapt and move, and they're not quick enough on the ground to turn that learning from that first EVA into that second EVA. So it seems that the ground teams are essentially holding back a little bit where the crew would be from a performance standpoint. But we need to look at that and learn from that. On these pictures, you can see Sunny up there in the upper left-hand corner there. She's getting ready for a blood draw from the nutrition experiment. And I think that's a very intriguing experiment. We're able to now take blood and urine samples and saliva samples throughout the increment. We freeze them in a minus 85-degree freezer, and then we'll be able to return those samples. So we can see how, for example, the blood chemistry changes over time as a function of duration in space. Before we would get maybe 2 data points. We would get one pre-flight, we would get one post-flight, but we haven't had the chance of essentially getting a continuum of data across the entire expedition. So now we can take them on maybe 2-week increments, and we could see how the blood chemistry changes over time. Do we still continue to see degradation in certain chemicals continuously, or do they peak out and then they just gradually change over time? So we're going to get a chance to see some more details of how things are occurring, and I think that's a very intriguing piece of data that we're going to get. The other thing that I would say on this one is you also see the crew getting ready to go EVA. They're doing a pre-breathe protocol where they're breathing the nitrogen out of their system to prevent the bends when they go into the spacesuits and lower the pressure. Again, we've learned here that this thing as simple as a mask, after they've been stored on orbit for multiple months, up to a year, some of the rubber components no longer function, they leak, set screws back out, the mask doesn't function, then how do we repair and maintain that mask? It's not as simple as just going to get another one on the ground. We have to be prepared to go ahead and maintain those. On station, we've been able to fly some extra ones up and have some spares, but we need to think about things as simple as that. Components on the ground that are readily available. These masks are used by air crews all the time, but they're changed out on aircraft periodically. In the case of space station, we were planning on not changing them out, and we need to see how we want to go do that. Again, some more pictures of things. You can see in the upper left-hand corner, Leroy is changing out the pump out of the EMU. We would have typically returned our entire spacesuit to the ground to repair it. We had a little pump that failed, and the pump is about the size of my finger. It sits on a magnetic shaft and spins and pumps cooling water through the spacesuit. We were able to actually go in and remove that little impeller that was clogged and was jammed and replaced it with another one, and then we then flew the suit down to the ground later, or we could have used the suit then for an EVA. So instead of replacing maybe a 300-pound suit, we were able to change out a part as small as my finger and keep the suit functional. So again, we learned the importance of being able to maintain equipment on orbit. I would also say that the Russian equipment is much better designed for maintainability than ours. A lot of their valves are common across systems. A lot of their batteries are common across systems, where in our world, we will optimize a battery for its particular application, so we have to spare 30 different batteries for 30 different devices. In the Russian world, they'll have one battery that fits in all 30 devices. It's over-specified in some areas, it's under-specified in others, but it's interchangeable across the system. Same with valves. The valves that they use in their oxygen generation system are the same valves that are used in their CO2 removal system, so they need to spare one valve and they can use it in multiple applications. In our world, they're customized, so we need to think about that. Another area that's very interesting is the spacesuits. Our spacesuits, we have 13 spacesuits in our entire inventory, and they were going to serve us all the way through 2010 when we end the space shuttle program. Those suits have been around from the very beginning. They're always maintained and repaired. The Russian space suits, they're used 5 times and they're disposed of, and they bring in a new space suit. I think there's some real advantages of the disposable space suit. If they wanted to put a new band in the elbow to give you more mobility in the arm, they were able to just take the next suit off the assembly line and add that extra bearing into the spacesuit on the Russian side, whereas if we would have done that on the U.S. side, because our suits are all custom and meant to be recyclable, it would have probably taken us 2 or 3 years to go ahead and make a simple design change like that. It was easy for the Russians to accommodate because they have essentially a production line of suits coming along. They don't have the parts obsolescence problems that we do because they can essentially build new parts in as they build their suits. So again, we can learn from our Russian partners on how to maintain and look at things. And there's not one approach that's better than another. They fit in different applications, but what I'm trying to make you think about is in your particular areas, medical equipment, other areas, think about how your equipment is designed, think about availability, think about ease of the user to use it, think about whether it's recyclable, think about whether it's disposable. Think about those things in your design trades. Get a chance to practice them either in terrestrial applications or on space station, and then make those changes. The other things you'll see here in the center is Mike LA is using the -85-degree freezer that keeps the samples I talked about frozen. Sunny over here on the top right-hand picture, she's using a new device. It's a microbial, it detects bacteria. It uses, I think, crab serum, and you can rub it across the surface, then you can inject it in there to give you instantaneous bacteria count in a certain area of what bacteria is growing on certain surfaces within space stations. So that gives essentially the crew members the ability to look at If there's a spill or something growing, is it a toxic, is it a bacteria we're concerned about? They can actually sample it in space, understand it, get the actual level of the contamination on the surface, and determine if it's a problem. So that's an example of something I think we want to go do more of. As crews get more and more remote to the moon and to Mars, they're going to have to do more in situ or analysis at the location and not have to return it to the ground. I think there's lots of advantages to that, and this is an example of a new device that we're starting to fly on space station that allows us to do essentially bacterial counts on surfaces. And again, exercise is important. And then even another thing in terms of high-performing crews, I heard a little bit this morning talk about the psychology of keeping crews happy. Simple things as getting a haircut is probably important too. How you take showers, how you do personal hygiene, simple things. Those over long periods of time can be important to you. Do you trust your hair to that guy with the razor that you don't know too well? Is that a good thing or a bad thing? But those are the things that I think you need to think about in terms of keeping the crews ready to perform the missions that they're supposed to go do. In terms of hardware systems, these are some things that we've had a little bit of trouble with. Those four little things up there that weigh about 400 pounds each. Those are 4 control moment gyros that control the attitude of space station. They were supposed to last about 8 to 9 years was their design life. We've had one failed in a little bit less than a year, and then the other one made it almost 2 years before it failed. So those are definitely not high available systems, and they're big and they're hard to change out. So we're trying to look at what occurred on those, what happened to them. We ran them on the ground for almost 6 years of runtime on the ground, but there's something about the zero gravity environment and the way we're using them that's a little bit different, and we don't understand exactly what's happening. We got one of the failed components back. We couldn't determine why it failed. It was essentially the bearing was so destroyed when we got back, there was really no evidence of what was the contributor to the cause. We've got one on orbit now that is acting up. We'll return it this summer, and I think we'll maybe get a chance, if we got lucky, we didn't run it so long that it failed in such a way that we can't forensically tell what occurred to it, so maybe we'll get an understanding of what's happening to these. We're going to probably repackage these in the future. Instead of having one big wheel, we'll take each one of these and we'll put 3 or 4 little wheels in the same package, so then they're easier to fly up and easier to maintain. So we're going to go look at a way of providing the same capability but in easier packaging, or something that's easier to change out. Our solar arrays, those have been functioning very well. They're designed to take micrometeoroid hits. In fact, there's quite a few holes in the panels if you take a look at them, and that's fine. The wiring is wired through there such that you can take significant hits in there and not lose much power generation capability. So I think we've done a pretty good job there. We had a little trouble retracting it, as you may have seen in the news. We're going to have to do that again here on this next flight again, retract it, and then eventually move it and deploy it. We'll see how that works. I had the Soyuz vehicle up there, and you can see it. I have Sachs down here in the right-hand corner doing some thermal control system stuff, and he can tell you what he was doing if you talk to him during the break. And then I have a picture of the Canadian arm over here. It was on orbit for about 2 years when a little tiny wire about the thickness of my hair drifted between 2 connectors in the wrist joint of the arm and shorted out the arm, and it stopped working. So we had to do wrist surgery on the Canadian arm after it was about a year and a half ago. I thought it'd be neat to say that at a medical conference. So we had the crew go out and change out the wrist and put in a new wrist, and it was functional, and it's fine and been operating fine ever since. So again, this was just a little wire that was actually part of a EMI control on the outside of a braid, very, very small, and it had just been cut and just snipped off and just accidentally drifted into the connector after about a year of operation, and then shorted out the wrist. And so again, how do you spare? What do you spare component-wise? This wrist was huge. It was a big deal to change it out. Is there a better way to make it more functional and more maintainable? So those are things that we need to think about as we go forward. But again, this is a great example to learn what to do and what not to do. Some more high available systems. Our carbon dioxide removal system is something we really need to watch and take care of. The picture in the very center is a volatile organic analyzer. which some folks are shaking their head in the back of the room. Nigel will talk to you about that later. That's an interesting device. It failed right after we got it calibrated. We returned grab samples to the ground to be truth. So in other words, we took a sample of the air into an evacuated bottle. We returned it to the ground. We looked at the analysis of the air in the bottle. We compared it. We determined that the volatile organic analyzer was operating correctly. It was reading the samples correct, and then it failed. This also occurred just prior to the Columbia tragedy, so we didn't have the ability to immediately change it out and bring another one up. So what that forced us to do was to look at, could we go repair this device that really wasn't meant to be repaired on orbit? And we went to England and determined that the high probability was a failure, I think, of a thermal resistor inside of it. And so we were able to go in and actually cut that thermal resistor out and put another one in. And we've now got the volatile organic analyzer up and operating. I need to knock on wood somewhere here. I think it's momentarily operating on orbit and working. But again, we were able to repair that by just changing out a very small component and spending a fair amount of crew time, but we were able to fix it and get it back up on operating again. Over on the right-hand side is a very important piece of equipment. It's the oxygen generation system. It's about the size of a water heater in your house. It generates the oxygen for the space station. That's a Russian system. It's very reliable, but I would say it's fickle. It needs a fair amount of care and feeding to keep it up and operating, but it works pretty well. We have a new U.S. system that's been delivered to on orbit. After this next space shuttle flight, we'll do an EVA to hook up the external hydrogen vent for the U.S. system, and we'll try to activate the U.S. system this summer. I expect the U.S. system to have lots of problems. I don't think that it will operate smoothly, but again, we'll get a chance to learn from it. The Russians have had a lot of time to work on the Electron system, many years, probably 2 decades. They still have trouble with it, so to think that our system's going to come up and immediately operate would be naive. Our system will come up, it will have problems, and we'll have to sort it out over the next couple of years. But again, that will be important technology that we're proving and getting it ready to go operate on the Moon and in the Mars environment. And then down in the lower picture, I know some folks here will be excited. That's ultrasound, and I don't think he's ultrasounding his head, but he's down there at least playing with the ultrasound. And again, that's been a tremendous benefit again for the crew in the sense of a telerobotic or telemedicine science kind of standpoint. And then the last picture is just the EVA spacesuits and the self-portrait. Again, in terms of operational experience, we're learning how to operate the space station. It's a tremendous international effort. We work daily with our Russian counterparts. Later this year, hopefully the European module, Columbus, will get launched, and then the European Control Center will be up and operating. And then next year, the Japanese module should fly in either the January or February timeframe. And again, we're learning to operate daily internationally. So it's in a ways, it's fairly easy now because there's just the U.S. and Russia that interact with each other. When we bring in the Japanese and the Europeans, I think it'll be a much more difficult mix. You can do a lot of things bilaterally, but now when you have 4 folks working together, I think that's going to be a little more challenging for us to set those priorities and work together as a team. The team has really grown well together. Through the Columbia tragedy, the team really pulled together extremely well. We learned how to optimize the best from each of the systems and work together. I know you talked a little bit about competition and cooperation. I think competition may get you a faster result, but if you really want a long-lasting result that endures over multiple decades, cooperation is a much better way. And that's what we've seen here during these times. Down in the right-hand corner is a picture of the way we track consumables. When we had the Columbia tragedy, again, water became an extremely tight commodity on board space station. So we now had to track water at a very, very low, very tight rate to make sure we had the right amount of water and to project ahead to make sure we had the right water that was needed at the right times. We protect skip cycles so we could miss one critical resupply and still have enough consumables available to make it to the next critical resupply. So we need to, again, think about those things for the other environment. The other thing we tracked was food. I thought it was interesting when Leroy talked about how much he enjoyed food. We knew that because his food got tight around Christmas time one year. You can ask him about that. But luckily we got the Progress vehicle with the right food at the right time and kept him there. We had enough calories on board, but we didn't have the right nutritional content on board. Again, along the lines of operational experience, you talked a lot about radiation. The picture on the left of the mannequin is Matrushka, which is a Russian medical payload that looks at radiation levels. And there's one on the outside of space. I think this is the one that got mounted on the outside of Space Station. And it actually measured radiation levels. The thing that's nice about it is that the sensors are buried in the Matrushka, so you can actually change the individual sensors out. So if you want to gain some new data in another technique, you don't have to replace the entire mannequin. You can just pull it apart and insert whatever radiation measuring device you want in the mannequin to get you the data that you need. So that's a very nice device. We have a microscience glove box there in kind of the center inset. And again, that's nice because now you can do some biological samples, or there's things you're worried about, contaminants getting back in the environment. You can keep them isolated in the glove box and you can do some experiments there. The top picture in the center there is the robotic control station. I think the thing you'll find there is that we do all the arm operations without actually looking out the window. The crew actually looks at computer displays to maneuver the arm and manipulate the arm around. The other thing we're learning on Space Station is we can do some arm commanding now from the ground, and we actually do some grapples from the ground now. So we're using the ground to take some of the mundane or routine things away from the crew. We move the mobile transporter up and down the truss. It moves about 1 inch a second or so, and it's very, very slow. But the ground guys can command that, can go ahead and do those movements, and then free the ground up for more important tasks. And then the last picture there is Valery Tokarev out on the outside with doing the EVA. When Space Station's complete, which will be pretty much at the end of next year, into 2008, it'll be about the size of a 5-bedroom home, so a pretty decent research laboratory. It'll have the power up there of 780,000 kilowatt hours per year, which is enough for about 50 homes here in Houston. So it has quite a bit of power generation capability. You can see the length down there in meters and the weight. I won't read any of those to you, but I think we're also going to have a lot of basic research capability on board Space Station with lots of different racks. We'll have 5 express racks. We'll have this minus 80-degree freezer we have up there now. We'll have the European modular cultivation system. We'll have a combustion integration rack. We'll have a fluids integration rack. We'll have some muscle atrophy research exercise systems. We'll have a microscience research rack. We'll have the window observation facility up there, and we'll have space drums up there to do some material processing. So I think there's a lot of capability on board Space Station. We need to think about how we're going to use that, how we can productively use that to meet the next challenges that come to us in terms of Moon and Mars. So again, I think it's got a tremendous capability, a lot of chance to learn lots of things. You can learn engineering things, you can learn science things, you can learn research things. And I think it's something that we really need to think very much about utilizing and taking forward. All right. And again, I'll just close with the final picture again of kind of where we're heading and where things are. And with that, I probably got some time for some questions. So if you want to ask some questions, I can do that. Any questions from anyone? Okay. Well, all right. So again, what 2 things were you supposed to learn? I feel like a teacher here, right? You're supposed to think about, right, what you should be doing now to prepare for exploration. So that's number 1, right? And then number 2 is how you might utilize the space station or use what we're doing today to further those investigations. So again, thank you for your attention and enjoy the conference.